Welcome to the Ultimate Sports Blog Podcast. Today's Monday, March 18th, 2019. Today I'm going to recap yesterday's college basketball, NBA, and NHL games, look ahead to tonight's slate. In two of those three, college basketball, I don't think the postseason tournaments begin tonight. I'm not sure. I know NIT begins Tuesday, and obviously the first four of the NCAA tournament begins Tuesday night. And I'm obviously going to go over the bracket. Not going to make picks yet. I'm going to do that on a separate podcast that is going to be released tonight. But I'm just going to go over the bracket on this podcast. And I'll guess the lines on this podcast for all the first four and first round games. And then obviously my best bet of the day. All right, college basketball results from yesterday. There are only 6 games because obviously the brackets are unveiled and you just had the conference championship games. In the SEC tournament final, Auburn defeats Tennessee. It was a pretty big upset. And they beat them outright by a score of 84-64. So that was a very impressive win for Auburn. In the Ivy League, you had Yale defeating Harvard by a score of 97-85. I think a lot of people expected Yale to win that game because of the home court, and that's what I predicted on the podcast where I predicted the Ivy League tournament. The Sun Belt, you had in the Sun Belt final, you had Georgia State defeating Texas Arlington 73-64 as Georgia State goes to the big dance. The Atlantic 10 final, you had 6-seeded St. Louis win the auto bid in that tournament over St. Bonaventure in the final by a score of 55-53. That was a great game that was on CBS. You had the AAC tournament final, which had Cincinnati defeating Houston by a score of 69-57. And then the Big Ten tournament final with Michigan State defeating Michigan by a score of 65-60, and that was a pretty good game. Too bad because Michigan State came at a cost for them as one of their role players, Kyle Aherns, suffered a severe leg injury, and he had to get carted off on a stretcher, so that's not good. Now on to the NBA. I'm just going to go through results and then look ahead to tonight's games. Knicks over the Lakers 124-123. That was the upset I called on the podcast the other day, so that was a very good pick. The Heat over the Hornets 93-75. 76ers over the Bucks 130-125. Pistons over the Raptors 110-107. The Magic over the Hawks 101-91. Kings over the Bulls 129-102. Rockets over the Timberwolves 117-102. And the Clippers over the Nets 119-116. Tonight's games at 7 o'clock, you have the Pistons at the Cavs, the Jazz at the Wizards, 7:30 the Knicks at the Raptors, the Nuggets at the Celtics, 8 o'clock the Heat at the Thunder. ESPN, a big one, the Warriors at the Spurs, Dave Pasch, Jeff Van Gundy on the call. The Spurs have been phenomenal at home. That's 10 straight home wins. The status of Kevin Durant is unknown. Whether they have Durant or not, I'm going to take the Warriors on the road. I just like how they've been playing. So the Spurs win streak at home will come to an end against the more superior Warriors team. 8:30 Pelicans at the Mavericks, 10 o'clock the Bulls at the Suns, and 10:30 ESPN the Pacers at the Trailblazers. This game, I'm sorry, I just don't see any way how Portland, this isn't a double-digit win for them. Like, I just don't see how this is not Portland destroys them, because no Victor Oladipo and the Pacers on the West Coast. I think this is their first game of the West Coast trip, and Portland usually thrives on national television against less superior teams. In this case, Pacers without Oladipo is a less superior team. Portland giving 4.5 is an absolute steal. I think this line should be closer to 7.5. And I'm going to say the Blazers win, and they win big over Indiana. The NHL. Avalanche over the Devils 3-0. Sabres over the Blues 4-3 in a shootout. Not a good loss for the Blues. Islanders over the Wild 3-2 in overtime. Good win for the Islanders. Canucks over the Stars 3-2 in a shootout. Bad loss for Dallas. Flyers over the Penguins 2-1 in overtime. That was a great game on NBCSN last night. The Ducks over the Panthers 3-2, and the Golden Knights with a much-needed win over the Oilers by a score of 6-3. Tonight's slate is small. You only have 4 games. 7:30 the Coyotes at the Lightning. 8:30 the Canucks at the Blackhawks. 10:30 the Jets at the Kings, and the Golden Knights at the Sharks. Golden Knights Sharks is a beauty tonight, which could be seen on ESPN+. Now I'm going to go over the bracket, which was obviously unveiled last night. Without further ado, here we go. I'm going to start with, obviously, the left top corner. Your number 1 overall seed, as I predicted, was the Duke Blue Devils. And they will play the winner of a playing game between NC Central and North Dakota State. And as I go through the real bracket, I'm going to pull up my final projected bracket. And I was right. I did predict Duke would be the number 1 overall seed in the East region. And where I messed up with the 16 seeds is that I didn't have Duke playing a play-in game winner. I had them playing Fairleigh Dickinson. So that was a mistake on my part. Your 8-9 in the East region is VCU and UCF. That is a fun game. I had VCU as an 8 seed, but in the Midwest. And I had UCF as a 9 seed in the Midwest. So I had these two teams facing off against one another, but in the wrong region. Your 5 seed in the East region is Mississippi State, and your 12 seed in the East region is Liberty. I had Mississippi State as a 6 seed, so I was 1 seed off there. And Liberty, I had 12 in the East, so that's my second correct seeding prediction. That was really good by me. Your 4-13 in the East region is Virginia Tech and St. Louis. I had Virginia Tech as a 6 seed, so I was way off with that team. I think that the Hokies are a good team, but I just think they were a little overseeded. Maybe the return of Justin Robinson, that the committee knew something that I didn't. And St. Louis, I had a 13 seed, but in the West. Your 6 seed in the East is Maryland, and 11 seeds a playing game between Belmont and Temple. My prediction for the Terps was a 7 seed in the South region, so I was 1 seed line off there. I did not have Belmont making the tournament, so that was an X. The 2 teams I missed were Florida and Belmont, and the 2 teams I had in there instead were TCU and NC State, who I both had playing in Dayton, and neither of those teams made it. I'm okay with Belmont being in because they're a smaller school that had a great year, and I just didn't think the committee had the balls to put in that team, and I don't get why Florida is in the dance. They did not win the auto bid. their best win came against LSU without Will Wade, and I think that TCU should be in instead of them. So I think TCU was the biggest snub, although TCU had some bad losses down the stretch of the end of the year, which ultimately undid their fate. And you could argue NC State probably belonged too, because they were high in the net rankings, and they were ranked a lot of the year, and they somehow slipped their way to the NIT. So Maryland, I was wrong. I thought they'd be a 7. They ended up being a 6. And in Belmont and Temple, I had Temple as an 11 seed, but in the Midwest. And I also had Temple in as a Dayton representative. The 3 seed in the East region is the LSU Tigers, and your 14 seed is Yale. I had LSU a 3 seed, but except in the West. And Yale, I had a 14 seed, except in the Midwest. So I've hit a couple of these seeding numbers. And as I go through the list, I'm going to asterisk the ones that got the seeding right, but the region wrong. Like Temple and St. Louis and Yale and Dickinson. I had those teams. Oh, and UCF and VCU as well. I had those teams on the right seeding lines, but in the wrong region. So I'm doing pretty good with these guesses, but except I'm getting the regions wrong. But I don't have a problem with that. But the seed line is the one that ultimately matters of where I project and where they actually are. Your 7th seed in the East region is Louisville, and your 10 seed is Minnesota. The intriguing thing about this game is obviously it's Richard Pitino against his father's old school. I did have Louisville as a 7 in the East, so that was a correct pick by me. And I had Minnesota as an 8 seed in the East. So I got their region right, but their seed number wrong. I really thought that Purdue win was going to do them wonders, but I guess it really didn't. And maybe they took part of the regular season more than the conference tournament. I need to know that for next time, because I had the same problem last year with my projections and how things played out, because I think I bought too much into the conference tournaments with seed lining, but it seems like they really care more about the regular season and how you did in non-conference play more than anything. And last but not least, your 2 seed in the your 2 seed in the East region is Michigan State, and your 15 seed in the East region is Bradley. So I had Michigan State projected as a 1 seed in the Midwest because they won the Big Ten tournament. So I thought they'd bump them up to a 1 seed, but no, they're a 2 seed. And Bradley I had as a 14 seed in the South. So I was 1 seed line off with both of those teams. Now to the bottom left of the bracket, which is the West region. Your 1 seed in the West region is Gonzaga, and they're the number 4 overall seed. I had Gonzaga as 1 in the West, so that was a correct pick by me. And they're playing the play-in winner with Fairleigh Dickinson and Prairie View A&M. So I was wrong about the region for Prairie View, but I had Prairie View in the play-in game. And the other one that they're playing is Fairleigh Dickinson. And I had North Dakota State as a 16 seed too, but I had them in the West region rather than the East region against Duke. Your 8-9 in the West region is Syracuse and Baylor. I correctly predicted Syracuse to be the 8 seed in the West. I had Baylor as the 10 seed in the East, so I was 1 line off for Baylor. Your 5-12 in the West region is Marquette and Murray State. That is my favorite first round game. You have Marcus Howard and you have John Morant, so that should be a fun one to watch. I was right about Marquette being a 5, but I had them in the wrong region. Murray State, I had them in the at-large portion of the field rather than the auto bid portion of the field. I had them as a 10 seed rather than a 12 seed. Your 4th seed in the West region is Florida State, and your 13th seed is Vermont. I was correct about Florida's placement being the 4th seed in the West. And then Vermont I had as a 13th seed in the East. So I just got the region wrong for Vermont. Your 6th seed in the West region is Buffalo. I had Buffalo as a 7 seed. So I was 1 seed line off with Buffalo. And they will play the winner of the playing game between Arizona State and St. John's. I was correct about St. John's being in Dayton. If I had them in the Midwest facing Temple. I had Arizona State in the right region, but 1 seed line off. Your 3 seed in the West is Texas Tech, and your 14 seed is Northern Kentucky. I had Texas Tech as a 3 seed, except in the Midwest rather than the West. Northern Kentucky I had as a 15 seed, so I had them 1 line off. West region 7 seed, Nevada. I was correct with that. And they will be playing 10-seeded Florida. I did not have Florida in the tournament. I think that is the least deserving team in the field, and they're a 10 seed. I just think that they took advantage of some situations and won some close games. And I just think this is the most overrated team in the field, and I think they should be in the NIT rather than the NCAA tournament. I think either NC State or TCU should be in that spot rather than Florida. I'm not going to argue about Belmont because I just didn't think they'd put Belmont in, and I didn't think Belmont would be in. So I'm actually happy for that school. I'm not going to kill Belmont because Belmont's in, because that's a good look by the committee by putting them in. In the West region, last but not least, you have 2-seeded Michigan and 15-seeded Nevada. I have Michigan as a 2 seed, except in the East, and I think they should have been in the East rather than the West, because they are the weakest of the 2 seeds, and the weakest of the 2 seeds usually plays the best 1 seed, and the weakest 1 seed usually plays the best 2 seed. But instead, they put the best 2 seed against the best 1 seed, and the worst 2 seed against the worst 1 seed, which I think was really weird. And in Montana, I had in the West region, except I had them as a 14 seed. To the top right corner of the bracket, Virginia and Gardner-Webb as your 116. I had Virginia as the 1 in the South, so that was another correct pick on my part. And then Gardner-Webb, I had a 15 seed in the West, so I was 1 seed line off with them. Your 8-9 in the South region is Ole Miss and Oklahoma. So I was correct where Ole Miss was landed in the bracket. Oklahoma I had as an 11 seed in the West, so I thought they were misseeded a little bit. Wisconsin and Oregon is your 5-12 in the South region. I thought Wisconsin would be a 4 seed, but I was wrong. And then Oregon is a 12 seed, but except in the Midwest. I had them as the 12th seed in the Midwest, and they're the 12th seed in the South. Your 4 seed is Kansas State in the South, and I had Kansas State penciled as a 5 seed in the West, so I was wrong there. And then your 13th seed in the South is UC Irvine. I had UC Irvine as a 13 seed, except in the Midwest rather than in the South, so I got the seed line right for UC Irvine. Your 6th seed in the South region is Villanova, and your 12th seed is St. Mary's. I had Villanova as a 6 seed, but except in the East region, so I was a little off there. St. Mary's I had as a 12 seed in the South, not an 11 seed, so they're suggesting that St. Mary's, if they hadn't beaten Gonzaga, could have been in Dayton, and that's ridiculous. I would have killed the committee if they put St. Mary's in as an at-large if they lost to Gonzaga, because too many losses. But the metrics really liked St. Mary's, but there's just too many losses in the WCC. So, and their non-con was, to give Randy Bennett some credit, he scheduled harder than he normally would, and they just took too many losses for me to be an at-large. So I would have killed the committee if they had St. Mary's in Dayton. Killed them. And then your 314 in the South region is Purdue, Old Dominion. I had Purdue as a 5 seed in the South. I just didn't think the committee would do them some love after their disappointing loss to Minnesota in the Big Ten quarterfinal. And their opponent in Old Dominion, I had projected as a 14 seed, but in the East region rather than the South region. Cincinnati, Iowa is your 7-10 in the South region. I had Cincinnati as a 5 seed after their big win in the AAC title game, but like I said, my big takeaway from this is that conference tournaments aren't really that important. And I noticed that last year too, but I just forgot. And in Iowa, I had as a 9 seed in the West. So I was 1 seed line off with Iowa. And last but not least, in the South region, 2 seed Tennessee and 15 seed Colgate. I was correct about Tennessee being the 2 seed in the South. And then Colgate, I had a 15 seed, but I had them in the Midwest region. And speaking of the Midwest region, they're next. Your 1 seed's North Carolina. I was obviously off on that one. I had Carolina as the 2 seed in the West. And then their opponent is Iona, who I had in a play-in game rather than a single game. So good on Tim Cluis's team for avoiding the dreaded play-in game, because it always feels like they end up, or that conference would end up in that game, but not this year. Utah State and Washington is your 8-9 in the Midwest. I had Utah State as the 11th seed in the South region. I'm very surprised. I think that team's overseeded, but you never know. Favorable matchup, possibly, with Washington, but I really don't love this game. And I had Washington slated as a 9 seed, but I had them in the East region rather than the Midwest. So got their seed right. Utah State, I was just way off. I thought they'd be lower in the bracket. Your 5-12 in the Midwest is Auburn and New Mexico State. I had Auburn penciled in as a 3 seed in the East because of their big win in the SEC title game, but as the selection committee shows us, the conference tournament looks like it's irrelevant now. And in New Mexico State, I had as a 12 seed in the West, but they're in the Midwest, so I was off on the region, but I was right about the seed line for them. Your 4-13 in the Midwest is Kansas and Northeastern. I had Kansas as a 4 seed, except in the East region rather than the Midwest. Northeastern I had as a 15 seed in the East region, so I was way off on their seed line. They had a couple notable wins in non-con, so maybe that did them some wonders. Iowa State and Ohio State is your 6-11 in the Midwest. I had Ohio State as a 10 seed in the Midwest, and I had Iowa State as a 4 seed in the South, so I was way off with Iowa State and Ohio State seed lining. Houston and Georgia State, I had Houston as a 3 seed in the South. They are a 3 seed in the Midwest. And in Georgia State, I had penciled in as a 13 seed in the South. They're a 14, so I was way 1 seed line off with Georgia State. Wofford and Seton Hall is your 7-10 in the Midwest. I had Wofford as a 6 seed in the Midwest, so I was 1 line off with them, and in Seton Hall as a 9 seed in the South. So 1 seed line off for Seton Hall. And last but not least, Kentucky and Abilene Christian. I had Kentucky as the 2 seed in the Midwest, so I got that correct. And then Abilene Christian I had as a 16 seed in the Midwest, so I was just 1 seed line off with them. So those are my bracket guesses, and I just went through the bracket. Now, guess the lines. I haven't done this since the Super Bowl, and I believe I said when I was closing out the Guess the Line segment for the Super Bowl, I think I said that I'd do this for the NCAA tournament, and here we go. We're going to go through the bracket regions, and then I'll guess the line, and then courtesy of FanDuel Sportsbook, I'll give you the actual line. We'll see how I do with this because I haven't done this in a while. The play-in game between NC Central and North Dakota State. I have North Dakota State as a 5.5-point favorite, and they are favored by 5.5, North Dakota State. So, first pick, first guess correct. That was awesome. And then Belmont and Temple, I have Temple as a 1.5-point favorite over Belmont, and Belmont's actually favored by 3, so that was not a good pick there. The Duke line won't be out until the NC Central North Dakota State game is played. I have Duke as a projected 26.5-point favorite over NC Central and projected 24.5-point favorite over North Dakota State. Michigan State Bradley, I have Michigan State minus 18 over Bradley. And Michigan State is favored by 18.5, so I was a half-point off there. LSU Yale, I have LSU minus 10.5 over Yale. LSU is only favored by 8, so 2.5 points off there. Virginia Tech St. Louis, I have Virginia Tech as a 9.5-point favorite over St. Louis. And Virginia Tech's favored by 10.5, so I was 1 point off. Mississippi State Liberty, I have Mississippi State favored by 10.5 over Liberty. They're only favored by 7. Maryland line isn't out yet, but I have the minus 5 over Belmont and minus 6.5 over Temple. Oh, wait a minute. I picked Belmont 1.5 over Temple. That was my bad. I read that wrong. So I was a 1.5 off on that one. Belmont's favored by 3, not by 1.5. So I was a 1.5 off there. I just had written in Temple, but I meant to put Belmont. So Maryland, I have minus 5 over Belmont, minus 6.5 over Temple. We'll see when that line comes out. I have Louisville as a 4.5-point choice over Minnesota. And Louisville is favored by 5, so a half point off. UCF VCU, I have UCF, the 9th seed, as a 4-point favorite over 8-seeded VCU. And VCU's a 1-point favorite. I think the wrong team's favored in that game. To the South region, I have Virginia minus 19 over Gardner-Webb, and they're minus 23.5, so 4.5 points off there. I have 2-seeded Tennessee as a 20.5-point favorite over Colgate. They're favored by 17.5, so 3 points off there. 3-seeded Purdue I have as a 12.5-point favorite over Old Dominion. They're favored by 13, so half point off. Kansas State, UC Irvine. I have Kansas State only favored by 6.5 over UC Irvine. And Kansas State is favored by only 5 over UC Irvine. So I was a point and a half off there. I didn't think I was going to be off in that direction. I thought Kansas State was going to be a little bit more than that. I have Wisconsin as a 4.5 point choice over Oregon, and Wisconsin's favored by only 1. 6-seeded Villanova I have as a 7-point favorite over St. Mary's, and Villanova is only favored by 5.5, so a point and a half off there. I have 7-seeded Cincinnati as a 4-point favorite over Iowa, and Cincinnati is favored by 3.5, so a half point off there. And Ole Miss, Oklahoma, this was a tough one to gauge. I had it as a pick'em. Ole Miss is favored by 2. Midwest, I have Carolina as a 23.5 point choice over Iona, and they're favored by 24.5, so 1 point off. Kentucky, Abilene Christian, I have Kentucky minus 24 over Abilene Christian, and Kentucky's favored by 22.5, so I was a point and a half off there. Houston, I have as an 11.5 point choice over Georgia State, and Houston is favored by 12, so 1 point off. Kansas Northeastern, I have Kansas minus 13.5 over Northeastern, and Kansas is favored by 7. I can't believe how small that point spread is. Auburn, I have as a 7-point choice over New Mexico State. Auburn's favored by 6.5, so a half point off there. Iowa State, I have as a 5.5 point favorite over Ohio State. And Iowa State is favored by 5.5, so that's the second correct pick on the Guess the Line segment. Seton Hall and Wofford, I have Seton Hall, the 10th seed, as a 3-point favorite over 7-seeded Wofford, but Wofford, believe it or not, they are the higher seed, and I wasn't sure if they'd be favored or not because of the small conference thing. They are favored by 2.5, so good for Wofford. And then Washington and Utah State, I have Washington as a 2.5 point favorite over Utah State. And Washington is favored, or I don't know if Washington's favored. We'll see in a second. Utah State's a 2.5 point favorite, so I got the number right, but the team wrong. West Region, last but not least. Play-in game, I have Prairie View A&M as a 1.5 point favorite over Fairleigh Dickinson. And Prairie View is getting 2.5. So Fairleigh Dickinson is the team that's favored by 2 points. I don't know if I agree with that, but whatever. It is what it is. Arizona State, St. John's. I have Arizona State as a 2.5 point favorite over St. John's. And Arizona State's laying only 1, so 1.5 off there. The Gonzaga line won't be out yet because of the result of the play-in game, but I have them favored by 22.5 over Fairleigh Dickinson, and I have them favored by 24 over Prairie View A&M. Michigan. Oh, I had that written wrong too. I had Dickinson favored by 1.5 over Prairie View, so that was another misreader on my part. So I was really only half point off there. Michigan and Montana, I have Michigan favored by 18.5 over Montana, and they're favored by 15.5, so 3 points off. Texas Tech, Northern Kentucky, I have Texas Tech favored by 14 over Northern Kentucky, and Texas Tech is favored by 14, so that is the third correct pick on the podcast so far. Florida State, I have as an 8-point favorite over Vermont, and Florida State is favored by 10.5. So 2.5 points off there. Marquette, Murray State, I have Marquette by 5 over John Morant and Murray State, and they're favored by 4.5, so a half point off there. The Buffalo line won't be out yet, but I have actually Arizona State as a 1-point favorite over Buffalo. And then Buffalo as a 2-point favorite over St. John. So I project this to be very close, and I just have a feeling that Arizona State would be favored over Buffalo because of Bobby Hurley, and he knows Buffalo and the whole deal. But I have Buffalo -2 over St. John's and Arizona State -1 over Buffalo. So it's a little bit confusing there. Nevada and Florida, I have Nevada -3.5 over the Gators, and Nevada's only -2, so a 1.5 off there. And last but not least, Syracuse Baylor, the 8-9. I have Syracuse by 5 over Baylor, and Syracuse is only laying 2.5. So there are the lines for the tournament. Before I get to my best bet, I just want to say that maybe starting at the end of this week, I'm going to start to have guests on my podcast to talk about a variety of things and whatever topics are in the news and whatnot. And if you are interested, please DM me on Twitter at MadisonMills28 and say you're interested, and I could pick whatever sports topic you would like to cover and whatnot. So just give me a heads up whether you're interested or not. And now my best bet of the day, brought to you by FanDuel. Yesterday I was off because the Bucks lost to the 76ers. So that's what single-handedly murdered me with best bet yesterday. And today we just have NBA and NHL to really pick, because college basketball, the tournament, doesn't really start until Thursday, and there's no really any locks. Don't feel good about the Pistons, but I'm going to go with them anyway. And same with the Jazz. I'll go with the Raptors. The Thunder are without Russell Westbrook, so I'm going to avoid them. So I have those 3 teams, and let's go to the NHL for some, because there's a couple locks tonight, I think. Tampa Bay, the Blackhawks. So that's a 5-teamer. Let's put $1 on. Payout of $4.20 with plus 320 odds. That's it for the podcast today. I'll be back tomorrow recapping everything from NBA, NHL. We'll talk more about the tournament. And tomorrow I'm finally going to do my MLB relievers rankings, because we've just been pushing that back with the tournaments and whatnot. So I'm going to try to push that for tomorrow. And later in the week I'm going to do an NFL mock draft as well. Hope you guys have a great day, everybody.